Across history, certain forms of divinity keep appearing. These forms are unstable and difficult to define. They repeatedly emerge at the fringes of institutional religion, offering forms of meaning the Church has struggled to provide. And yet, despite efforts to suppress them, they continue to reappear, even within the very systems that resist them. This divinity is liminal, wild, and cyclical. Let me introduce you to the Divine Feminine.
Hello everyone. Welcome to my new channel, where I aim to explore the mysteries of the world and our species through folklore, religion, mysticism, and more, and then see how these patterns emerge within our media. For the first series on this channel, I'll be diving into the topic of divine femininity, and exploring why this pattern of divinity continues to appear at the fringes of religion and folklore, as modern reinventions, and as challenges to the status quo. It's a very broad topic, and one that doesn't have as much unified scholarship as I initially expected when I set out to explore it. So I've had to carve out my own framework and guidelines to say anything meaningful about it. What interested me wasn't just whether these figures were remnants of older traditions, but why they continue to reappear at all. So, in this video, I'll be explaining what exactly I mean by divine feminine, laying out some guardrails and disclaimers, and then diving into our first major topic. To begin, a definition would help clear up what I'm talking about. The term divine feminine at the end of the day could refer to any divine female deity. Hera, Freya, Parvati, they all fit that definition. But that's not usually how the term is used. More often, it refers to feminine figures associated with embodiment, female empowerment, liminality, nature, or more fringe spiritual traditions outside of organized religion. The latter is what I'm leaning into for this series, though I will also be covering more established figures and deities, if appropriate. During my undergraduate studies, I repeatedly ran into strange and fascinating feminine figures within esoteric and unorthodox traditions. They were often radical, excessive, ecstatic, or other in some way. This pattern interested me, and while researching folk religion and feminine spirituality in Europe for my senior film project, I found a treasure trove of material that eventually became the basis for the series. There appears to be a reoccurring pattern across cultures and belief systems, where feminine figures emerge outside institutional religion to fulfill symbolic, experiential, or spiritual needs in ways that mainstream systems often struggle to accommodate. And that pattern is what I aim to investigate. Now, because the divine feminine is such a massive topic, I have to limit my scope somewhat so I don't cast too wide a net and end up with quantity over quality. My research primarily focuses on European traditions, since that's the region that I'm most familiar with. For now, this series will mainly explore examples from European, folk, pagan, and Christian traditions, though we'll occasionally branch out into Middle Eastern, Asian, or other traditions whenever relevant. Each episode will focus on a specific figure, tradition, or a recurring pattern connected to the divine feminine. We'll trace the history and the evolution of these figures, examine how they change over time, explore their place in the modern world, and analyze what they might reveal about the broader themes of this series. This first video will be the beginning of a two-parter covering Mother Earth. I imagine several chapters in this series will be spread out among at least 2 or 3 videos in order to give each figure its due diligence, and so I'm not releasing 2+ hour videos for each episode. Finally, a few disclaimers are in order. My primary goal with this project is to identify and examine recurring patterns within folklore, religion, and mysticism, not to force definitive conclusions onto them. I'll inevitably speculate at times, but I'll try to distinguish speculation from historical grounding whenever possible. Secondly, I want to make my position on one major theory very clear from the start. I am not a believer in the pagan survival theory, at least not in its stronger forms. I do not believe there was a single universal pagan religion secretly surviving underneath Christianity for centuries. Nor do I believe the ancient Europeans worshipped a mother goddess in female-led societies. There simply isn't enough evidence for that claim, and much of the argument relies heavily on romanticism, speculation, overinterpretation. That being said, there are historical patterns and recurring motifs that are difficult to ignore, and there are moments in the historical record that genuinely make me stop and scratch my head. But I don't think the Divine Feminine points towards some lost universal truth hidden beneath Christianity. I think it points towards a reoccurring pattern that reemerges throughout history to fulfill certain symbolic and experiential needs. With all that said, let us begin with the first example in this series, Mother Earth. Mother Earth, sometimes called Mother Nature or the Earth Mother, is a personification of the Earth or a figure that represents the Earth, and is often associated with the nurturing and life-giving aspects of nature. She is sometimes a goddess, sometimes a kind of spirit or embodiment with questionable divinity, and sometimes as a figurative device for the Earth itself. She is one of the oldest examples of the Divine Feminine, with some believing she may be one of the oldest goddesses ever worshipped. The reasons for her longevity are many, and we will discover them as we trace her long lineage in various forms. We will start at the beginning, with the oldest Earth Mothers we have on record. Many scholars believe that a large portion of Eurasian languages can be traced back to a common ancestral culture known as the Proto-Indo-Europeans, a hypothetical prehistoric people who likely originated on the Pontic-Caspian steppe during the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age, roughly 5,000 to 8,000 years ago. Through comparative linguistics and mythology, scholars have attempted to reconstruct aspects of Proto-Indo-European language, religion, and cosmology based on recurring similarities across later Indo-European cultures. One recurring pattern is the pairing of an Earth Mother figure with a Sky Father deity. Because these patterns appear repeatedly across Indo-European traditions, many scholars believe the Proto-Indo-Europeans may have possessed some form of Earth Mother cosmology. This Earth Mother, which we refer to as Degom, is thought to be the root of many of the Earth Mother goddesses across Eurasia. If this is correct, then the Earth Mother is one of the oldest deities on record and predates civilization. One of the earliest written examples of an Earth Mother is Prithivi Mata, a Hindu mother goddess, who is paired with the Sky Father, Dyaus, in the Rig Veda. An excerpt from an ode to her in the Atharva Veda reads as follows. May earth pour out her milk for us, a mother unto me her son. O Prithivi, auspicious be thy woodlands, auspicious be thy hills and snow-clad mountains. Unslain, unwounded, unsubdued, I have set foot upon the earth. On earth brown, black, ruddy and every-colored, on the firm earth that Indra guards from danger. O Prithivi, thy center and thy navel, all forces that have issued from thy body, set us amid those forces. Breathe upon us. I am the son of Earth. Earth is my mother. Parjanaya is my sire. May he promote me. O Earth, my mother, set thou me happily in a place secure. Of one accord with heaven, O sage, set me in glory and in wealth. Take note of a few characteristics. An explicitly feminine goddess who is the mother of humans, her body literally spewing forth life. There is also a link between her and heaven, the Sky Father, which we will see time and again in ancient times. Our first major stop in this journey will be the Greek Earth Mother, Gaia. Gaia, mother of all, I shall sing. The strong foundation, the oldest one. She feeds everything in the world. Whoever walks upon her sacred ground or moves through the sea or flies in the air. It is she who nourishes them from her treasure store. Queen of Earth, through you beautiful children, beautiful harvests come. It is you who give life to mortals and who take life away. Blessed is the one you honor with a willing heart. He who has this has everything. Gaia is the ancient Greek primordial goddess of the earth. Hesiod describes her as broad-breasted and wide-pathed. Emerged from chaos, she gave birth to Uranus, the heavens, Pontus, the sea, and Uria, the mountains. With her son, Uranus, she gave birth to the Cyclops, Titans, and the giants. Uranus despised his children, especially the Titans, so Gaia hatched a plan with her Titan son Cronus to kill him. While Uranus slept with Gaia, Cronus cut off his genitals and threw them into the sea. The blood spattered on Gaia and she begat the Furies, the Giants, and the Meliae. Later, Gaia would help Cronus' son Zeus overthrow him, and then in turn sent her other son Typhon after Zeus. Something to note here about Gaia is her tendency for chaos. She's not just a nurturing mother. She births monsters, hatches revolts, and resists domination. She's not just life, she is also death. This cyclical nature of life and death is a key aspect of many mother goddesses. A notable aside to mention is Rhea, the daughter of Gaia and a Titaness, who is known as the goddess of feminine fertility and the mother of the gods. A lot of her titles and role overlaps with Gaia, and for the sake of time, we won't dwell on her for too long, but she's definitely worth mentioning. Worship of Gaia was widespread, though usually through local shrines, altars, and cult sites rather than the great civic cults devoted to gods such as Athena or Apollo. Pausanias describes sacred ground dedicated to Gaia in Athens near a statue of Zeus and a temple of Cronus and Rhea. At Phlia in Attica stood an altar to Gaia, whom the locals called the Great Goddess. In Patras, a seated statue of Gaia stood near shrines to Apollo and Aphrodite, and a sanctuary to Demeter. Other cult sites dedicated to her existed at Aegae, Tegea, Olympia, and Laconia. Ancient Greek tradition also remembered Gaia as the original owner of the oracle at Delphi before Apollo inherited the sanctuary, though scholars debate how much history lies behind that story. Many scholars believe Gaia preserves elements of older Bronze Age fertility traditions and perhaps even older Indo-European concepts of an Earth Mother. Gaia herself spread to ancient Rome and was worshipped there as Terra Mater. She's one of the longest-lasting and most recognizable mother goddesses, with her name and influence being popular to this day. One of the key aspects of Gaia that is largely unique to her is her sense of primordial essence. She feels less like an Athena or an Aphrodite, and more of a force of nature, a substrate of existence and fertility itself. She was less of another member of the pantheon and more of the foundation that all humans, gods, titans, and monsters come from. She was the earth itself. Moving on to another earth goddess in the Greek pantheon, Demeter is the goddess of agriculture, fertility, and farming. While Gaia is the earth as a primordial force and source of life, Demeter is the earth's direct relationship with humanity, what earth can provide us through food, fertility, and childbirth. Demeter is one of the oldest gods in the Greek pantheon, dating back to the Mycenaeans around 1500 BCE, and her worship likely preserved or absorbed even older agrarian rituals and traditions, such as the Mycenaean Potnia. Etymologically, the word day is an ancient Doric variation of earth, and meter is derived from the Proto-Indo-European word for mother, so Demeter literally translates to Earth Mother. Demeter's most notable legend is the story of her daughter Persephone. She was stolen by Hades and taken to the underworld. Demeter searched everywhere for her, including at Eleusis, where she was cared for by a family under the guise of an old woman. Demeter revealed herself and instructed them to build a sanctuary there. Demeter eventually created a drought from her grief to try and convince Hades to release Persephone. An agreement was reached in which Persephone would spend part of the year with Hades and part with Demeter, a myth often used to explain the changing seasons. The sanctuary built at Eleusis in Attica is the home of the Eleusinian Mysteries, secretive religious rites dedicated to Demeter and Persephone. The rites have roots dating back to the Bronze Age and were a part of the earliest Demeter worship. Details of the rites are vague, but we know by the 6th century BCE they were held twice a year, the lesser mysteries in the spring and the greater mysteries in the autumn. More specifics include outdoor processions, possible feasting and revelry, reenactments of the story of Demeter and Persephone, cleansings and purifications in the sea at Phaleron, and the focal point. A priestess led a procession from Eleusis to the Agora in Athens, then returned back led by the sacred chariot of Iacchus. The rites and the reenactments likely represent the cycle of seasons and the cycle of life and death, and may reflect agricultural practices surrounding the sowing and preservation of grain. Demeter's worship was much more organized and established than Gaia. Homer mentions a Demeter precinct in Pyrrhasos. There were temples in Naxos, Dion, Andania, and Lycosara. Of course, the sanctuary at Eleusis was her most important site of worship, with it continuing to be used until the 5th century CE during the downfall of the Roman Empire. In Phigaleia, a cult placed a statue of her in a cave with a horse's head, a reference to her union with Poseidon, and they worshipped her as Demeter Melena, Black Demeter. Southern Italian worshippers, especially Sicilians, associated her with civic duties alongside her agrarian and fertility aspects. Demeter as a Mother Earth figure is Earth as a lived experience. Her worship and mythology provided real lessons and meaning, explaining agriculture, seasons, and fertility. The story of her and Persephone combines motherhood, grief, life and death, fertility, seasons, cycles, descent, and return of life into one myth. Demeter's grief literally withers the earth, showing how tied to the planet and its cycle of life she is. The mystery rites provided a liminal and experiential religious encounter that stood apart from ordinary civic worship. The image of a horse-headed Demeter placed within a cave evokes themes of fertility, transformation, sexuality, and the chthonic underworld. Combined, Demeter and Gaia represent two of the most common mother-goddess archetypes we see in the ancient world. There is another example from this region that is quite notable, one who is harder to define and one who is noticeably more wild and chaotic. Cybele, the great mother of the gods, was a mother goddess whose worship likely originated in Phrygia in Asia Minor, now west-central Turkey. Her worship spread to Greek territory, who identified her as Rhea. Eventually, the two were combined. During Hannibal's invasion of Italy in the 3rd century BCE, a Sibylline prophecy promised the Romans victory if the Idaean mother was brought to Rome, alongside her sacred symbol, a small stone thought to have fallen from heaven. Cybele, to the Romans, was known as Mater Deum Magna Idea, or the Great Idaean Mother of the Gods. Thus, her worship came to Rome and was firmly rooted by the end of the Republic. Cybele was not only the mother of the gods, but of humans, beasts, and nature itself. An emphasis was especially put on her motherhood of wild nature. She was often depicted in Roman art with a mural crown and veil, riding a chariot drawn by 2 lions. Something to note was Cybele's worship was rooted in cults outside of civic state worship in Rome. Romans emphasized tradition, rites, and civic worship over personal faith and experience, and so this cult from the East that was largely out of the government's hands and was much more chaotic and experiential was seen as quite odd. While officially recognized by the Roman state, many of Cybele's more ecstatic rites and priesthoods remained controversial and heavily regulated. Worship of Cybele was orgiastic. Her attendants, corybantes, were wild, musical beings. Her priests, the Galli, castrated themselves upon induction. Her lover, the fertility god Attis, emasculated himself under a pine tree and died, and was later resurrected. His death and rebirth are often interpreted as representing vegetation cycles and seasonal death and rebirth. Cybele's annual festival from March 15th to 27th, a pine tree was cut and brought to her shrine, where it was honored as a god and adorned with violets considered to have sprung from the blood of Attis. On March 24th, known as the Day of Blood, her chief priest, the Archigallus, drew blood from his arms and offered it to her to the music of cymbals, drums, and flutes, while the rest of the clergy flailed about madly and cut themselves to spatter the altar and pine with their blood. On March 27th, the silver statue of the goddess, with the aforementioned sacred stone set in its head, was brought to and bathed in the Almone River. Such traditions were at home in Asia Minor at the time, but were considered much too violent for much of the Roman world. Still, Cybele persisted until the rise of Christianity in the 4th century CE. Cybele's flavor of Mother Goddess cast a wide net, being the mother of all life. Worship of her was even more liminal and experiential than Demeter, with ecstatic, violent, bloody traditions and rites. She embodied feminine violence and primal power, with subservient, castrated male priests. Her presence shook the system in Rome, frightening authorities. Like many later feminine sacred figures, Cybele occupied a space between official religion and personal religious experience, offering forms of spirituality that many Romans found both compelling and unsettling. Before moving on, I'd like to quickly examine other notable examples of mother goddesses from antiquity. This will be a sort of lightning round in order to show the sheer amount of mother goddesses that existed in antique Europe, and the similarities and differences between them to better highlight this recurring pattern. Staying in Rome, I mentioned earlier that they adopted Gaia as Terra Mater. However, she was not very popular to the Romans. Emperor Augustus included her near the end of a long list of deities who would receive offerings during state-sponsored games. She was paired with the Fates and the goddesses of childbirth. But not a single temple or shrine dedicated to her existed in the empire, and no inscriptions for her have been found in the western half. Romans more commonly worshipped Tellus as an agricultural earth goddess who fertilized the soil and had temples of worship. Tellus was paired with the grain goddess Ceres and her husband Cyrus. In the Baltic region, Ximena was a pre-Christian earth mother. She is the female aspect of nature and the source of all life. She interacts with the sky father, Dievs, and stimulates and protects all life. Bread, ale, and herbs were buried in the ground, thrown in rivers and lakes, and tied to trees as offerings to her. Some of her functions were later absorbed into local nature spirits and Marian folk traditions, though this will be discussed at greater length later. In the Germanic region, the goddess Nerthus was a local fertility earth goddess that was worshipped during the Roman age. Tacitus compared her to Terra Mater. He writes about her and the rites the Germanic tribes would perform in service to her in his work Germania. Further on lie a number of tribes, Rudigni and Aviones, Angles and Warings, Eudoces, Suardones, and Euthones, all with their ramparts of forest or of river. There is nothing that calls for notice among these tribes individually, except the worship of Nerthus or Mother Earth, which is common to them all, the goddess, according to their belief, mingling in the affairs of men and visiting her various peoples in her chariot. On an island out in the ocean there is an inviolate grove, where, covered by a robe, is a sacred car dedicated to her. One priest and only one may touch it. It is he who becomes aware when the goddess is present in her holy seat. He harnesses a yoke of heifers to the car, and follows in attendance with reverent men. Then are the days of festival, and all places which she honors with her presence keep holiday.
Men lay aside their arms and go not forth to war. All iron is locked away. Then only are peace and quietness known. Then only are they welcomed, until the priest restores her to her temple, when she has had enough of her converse with the mortals. Then the car and the robes, and, if we choose to believe them, the goddess herself are washed in a mystic pool. Slaves are the ministers of this office, and are forthwith drowned in the pool. Dark terror springs from this, and a sacred mystery enshrouds those rites which no man is permitted to look upon and live. This is significant because it's one of the only written accounts of an earth goddess's worship outside of the Greco-Roman world from this period. And it's rather stunning how similar this practice is to the Eleusinian mysteries and other similar rites from the pre-Christian world. Chariot procession, sacrificing of slaves, the sacred object which may not be touched save by a priest, the washing in the pool, these are not unique to Nerthus in the slightest. This does not necessarily imply a common religion, but it does suggest that many ancient peoples approached fertility, sacred space, and divine presence through remarkably similar ritual structures. Scholars link Nerthus to the later Norse god Njordur, suggesting an eventual shift in gender, or maybe a more fluid hermaphroditic nature, though this is speculation and uncertain. Circling back to Greece, the philosophers over there made a significant move forward in the conception of Mother Earth. She began to move from traditional religion to philosophy and figurative concepts. Aristotle and others developed the idea of physis, a feminine power or energy from which everything flows, comparable to Plato's world soul. Physis was linked to the similar Roman concept natura. Romans such as Ovid and Lucretius hailed natura as a goddess, a divinity who created all things. An Orphic hymn labeled Physis as a bisexual deity who connected earth and heaven, ruling over and giving life to the world. The goddess label is still present, but these philosophers and poets made the first steps towards disconnecting Mother Earth from pantheons and rites, and towards a role in a more introspective understanding of the universe. Across these traditions, the Earth repeatedly appears as feminine, maternal, fertile, cyclical, and deeply tied to both life and death. Sometimes she's a primordial force like Gaia, sometimes an agricultural deity like Demeter, and sometimes an ecstatic and untamed mother figure like Sibylla. These figures differ enormously across cultures, but recurring patterns emerge. The pairing of earth with sky gods, the association between femininity and fertility, embodied ritual practice, seasonal cycles, and the idea of the earth as both nurturing and destructive. Importantly, these figures rarely formed a single unified religion. Their worship was often localized, fragmented, and constantly evolving. Yet, despite these differences, the image of the earth as feminine persisted across centuries and cultures. It is not difficult to see why later scholars would look at figures like Gaia, Demeter, Nerthus, and Ximena, and began imagining a single ancient mother goddess behind them all. The transition from pagan to Christian in Europe was gradual, complex, and anything but a simple flip of a switch. This makes references to Mother Earth during this time hard to discern as literal or figurative. The Roman poet Claudian hailed Mother Nature as an old yet beautiful woman who provided order from chaos and caused the crops to grow. St. Augustine of Hippo, one of the most important writers and minds of the early Christian age, considered Natura as a teacher and guide to humanity, appointed by God to carry out his will. His opinion shifted over the years as to whether Natura was animate and sentient, but he never condemned the idea, which opened the door for later thinkers to consider such a thing. Mother Earth was invoked in charms and evocations during the early medieval period. In the Latin poem Precatio Terrae Matris, likely written by a pagan near the end of the Western Roman Empire, the fertile land is eulogized as Earth, Divine Goddess, Mother Nature.
This eulogy was incorporated into early medieval Christian medical texts as a charm to be said when collecting herbs, surviving until at least the 11th or 12th century. The Anglo-Saxon field blessing Acerbat from the late 10th or early 11th century, Urse, 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 Earth's Mother, was a long and elaborate charm to increase the fertility of a piece of land. The charm was, in reality, a day-long ritual that took even longer to gather all the necessary materials to perform it. The term Urse is thought to be of High German origin, meaning genuine or true. Scholar and author Kathleen Herbert has suggested that traditions associated with Nerthus may help explain the survival of Earth Mother imagery among the Anglo-Saxons, though direct continuity is difficult to prove. During the Dark Ages, as Rome was Christianized and subsequently toppled, Mother Earth was similarly integrated into Christianity and decentralized. Her meaning and role began to shift dramatically into figurative devices, Christian cosmology and philosophy, and as folk charms. However, she was soon to undergo even more evolution, as the Middle Ages truly took form in the centuries to come. The 12th century Renaissance, a boom in intellectual and cultural growth in Western Europe, brought on by the first formal universities being established in Europe and Greco-Roman texts being reintroduced to Europe through the Islamic world, saw a re-emergence of Mother Nature to the Europeans. The Platonist philosopher Bernard Sylvester, writing around 1150, wrote of Mother Nature in an epic as an entity created by God to form the world. She persuades the divine intellect, comparable to the Roman Minerva, to provide order in the universe. Plato's world soul gives the construction life, and Natura fashions souls inside of humans formed by the world soul. Natura then works with two other goddesses, Thesis, the earth, and Urania, the heavens, to instruct humans, answerable to the Trinity. Alan of Lille, a French theologian and poet, hails Natura as the ruler of the world on behalf of God and maker of humanity in a pair of works. He depicts Natura as having a glittering crown with jewels representing the heavenly bodies and a robe featuring images of animals and plants. She rides a glass coach, drawn by peacocks and driven by a giant. She lives in a palace, is sister to the virtues, and in Alan's second work she sets out, ordained by God, to form a new human, bereft of flaws. Both Alan and Bernard were influenced by Claudian's depiction of Natura, as you might have already deduced. Many other medieval poets went on to use Natura in similar roles and depictions, including Geoffrey Chaucer. As the medieval period came to an end, depictions of her lessened as allegory fell out of fashion. The medieval Natura represents a major transformation in the history of Mother Earth. Rather than a localized fertility deity or the subject of ritual worship, nature becomes an allegorical and philosophical force embedded within Christian cosmology itself. She was intellectualized. Feminine earth symbolism survived the rise of Christianity, but increasingly as literature, metaphysics, and divine order, rather than pagan religion. One other interesting way Mother Earth persisted within Christianity was the overlap she has with the Virgin Mary. Many scholars believe Mary fulfills similar roles mother goddesses served in antiquity and the pre-Christian age. We'll look at Carl Jung and his contribution to the divine feminine later in this series, but as a brief aside, Jung believed that figures such as Mary expressed a recurring psychological need for feminine sacred imagery within traditions otherwise dominated by masculine symbolism. It was, indeed, a great problem to the Middle Ages, the problem of the Trinity and the exclusion or the very qualified recognition of the feminine element, of the earth, the body, and matter in general, which were yet, in the form of Mary's womb, the sacred abode of the deity and the indispensable instrument for the divine work of redemption. Within Christian theology during the Middle Ages, Mary became associated not only with fertility, but with nature and earth imagery. She is compared to a wheat field, a garden, or even the earth itself. St. Jerome writes, "The earth is Holy Mary who is from our earth, from our seed, from this clay, from this slime, from Adam. Dust you are, and unto dust you shall return. This earth has yielded its fruit.
What it lost in the Garden of Eden, it has found in the Son. Well is Mary called a full field, because she is said to be full of grace, from whose womb the fruit of life came forth to all believers. The Maronite Catholics more explicitly associate Mary with agriculture, calling her Our Lady of the Seeds, Our Lady of the Harvest, and Our Lady of the Grapes. Medieval art often depicted Mary in a garden or wearing an ear-dress made of wheat. Taking a break from Europe and going across the pond, there are instances of indigenous American traditions merging Mary with local Mother Earth figures. One of the most famous examples is Our Lady of Guadalupe, who became associated with the Aztec fertility figure Tonantzin, often called Mother of the Corn. While historians debate the extent of direct continuity between the two, the symbolic overlap is difficult to ignore. As author Mirabai Starr writes, when Christianity collided with indigenous religions around the world, a kind of nuclear fusion unfolded between the Earth Mother and the Mother of Christ. The apparition known as Our Lady of Guadalupe, from the Valley of Mexico, is a particularly potent example. This hybrid of Mother Mary and Tonantzin, the Mother of the Corn in Aztec tradition, appeared on the exact spot where the Nahuatl people had been worshipping the fertility goddess. The tender mercy of Mother Mary alchemically melded with the fierce power of the Mother of the Corn, and a glorious advocate emerged. Whether one accepts Starr's interpretation entirely or not, Guadalupe demonstrates how Marian devotion could absorb and coexist with older traditions of sacred motherhood, fertility, and the land itself. In another example, the Andean people of South America believed in a mother goddess called Pachamama, who is associated with the hills and mounds. When they were converted to Christianity, they began to make art depicting Mary as a mountain. The significance of these examples is not that Mary secretly replaced ancient earth goddesses. Rather, many of the same symbolic needs persisted. Medieval Christians still required images of fertility, nurture, embodiment, protection, and the relationship between humanity and the natural world. Mary increasingly became a vessel through which these meanings could be expressed, and that spread beyond the medieval world, and to other cultures that eventually adopted Christianity. We'll revisit Mary in later videos in the context of other divine feminine figures and archetypes, but for now, let's move on. As the Middle Ages came to an end and the Renaissance brought a renewed curiosity about nature, science, and the wider world, one might assume Mother Earth would begin to fade into the background. Surely an age of astronomers, explorers, and natural philosophers had little need for old feminine symbols of the earth. Yet, as we will see, this isn't quite what happened. If anything, nature became increasingly enchanted, and Mother Earth found new forms to inhabit. The Renaissance saw a surge of scientific curiosity, the revival of classical learning, and radical new ideas about humanity's place in the universe. Yet this did not mean Europe simply traded spirituality for rationalism. Alchemy, astrology, hermeticism, and natural magic all remained part of the era's attempt to understand the hidden structure of creation. Alchemy had existed in Europe for centuries and still concerned itself with physical transformation, such as the production of precious metals, medicines, and life-extending substances. But in the Renaissance, these practices were often woven into broader philosophies of nature as a living, sacred, interconnected force filled with hidden correspondences and transformative power. Platonic ideas such as the world soul, Aristotle's concept of physis, Christian understandings of creation, and Hermetic teachings such as above, so below, all existed in constant dialogue with one another, offering new ways to view the cosmos. Together, these traditions contributed to a vision of nature as a living, meaningful reality rather than mere inert matter. Hermetic thought especially emphasized correspondences between the heavens and the earth, teaching that the cosmos formed an interconnected whole in which celestial, terrestrial, and human realities reflected one another. These changing attitudes toward nature were reflected in Renaissance art, where Earth increasingly appeared as a feminine figure associated with fertility, abundance, and the generation of life.
Leandro Bassano's allegory of the element Earth represents the Earth element with an autumn harvest and Sibylla flying through the sky in her chariot. Adrian Colaire's Terra, Earth, depicts Mother Earth surrounded by fruit and foliage, adorned with a crown of plants, and bearing the inscription, Mother Earth, than whom no element is firmer, abides, situated in the midpoint of the world. She bears grass, flowers, at length bears pleasing fruits, animating from all quarters whatever is capable of life. Cristofano Robetta's allegory of Mother Earth shows a nude woman holding shrubbery and fruit, carrying and surrounded by infants. She sits in a hilly countryside with a home in the distance. While the Renaissance did not restore Mother Earth as an object of widespread worship, it did help to enchant nature. Earth was increasingly imagined not merely as physical matter, but as fertile, living, and meaningful. Classical mythology, Hermetic philosophy, Christian cosmology, and natural philosophy all contributed to a renewed vision of the natural world as something worthy of contemplation and wonder. This fascination with nature would only intensify in the centuries to come, as poets, artists, and philosophers increasingly looked to the natural world as a source of wisdom, spirituality, and meaning. I heard 1,000 blended notes, while in a grove I sat reclined, in that sweet mood when pleasant thoughts bring sad thoughts to the mind. To her fair works did nature link the human soul that through me ran, and much it grieved my heart to think what man has made of man. Robert Pogue Harrison, in his extraordinary work, Forest the Shadow of Civilization, makes an excellent point when it comes to humanity's longing for nature, something he calls a kind of Dionysian longing. In order for humanity to romanticize nature, to elevate it to fantastical heights in our mind's eye, to see it as the source of our being and the place where we truly belong, we first have to become separated from it. We have to clear the forests, build the cities, surround ourselves with walls, roads, and eventually the smokestacks and factories of industry. It is only after creating distance between ourselves and the natural world that we begin to look back on it with longing, nostalgia, and wonder. This is precisely the environment that gave rise to Romanticism. As Europe became increasingly urbanized, industrialized, and confident in the powers of reason, many poets, artists, and philosophers began looking in the opposite direction. They turned toward forests, mountains, ruins, folklore, dreams, and the natural world in search of beauty, spirituality, meaning, and a sense of connection they feared modern life was beginning to erode. One of the main functions of the Romantic movement, according to Ronald Hutton, was to, quote, eulogize the natural world as a fount of wisdom, beauty, and redemption from the more corrupting and debilitating aspects of civilization and urbanization. William Wordsworth, an English poet, was a pioneer of the Romantic movement. He often wrote of nature and humanity's spiritual relationship to it. He saw nature as the origin of humanity, a source of truth, and a place of spiritual grounding. His poetry helped bring a more romanticized and reverential view of nature back into the public consciousness. William Blake, another English poet, rejected the increasingly mechanistic worldview emerging from modernity, and instead portrayed the imagination in the natural world as spiritually alive and interconnected. To the eyes of the man of imagination, nature is imagination itself. Such longing for a spiritual, feminine nature naturally gave rise to Mother Earth figures within literature. The feminine personification of nature appeared in many forms during this period and the decades that followed. The 17th century Jesuit polymath Athanasius Kircher prefaced a book with a woodcut of the goddess Isis in the role of a female entity embodying the world on behalf of Christ in the form of the Platonic world soul. English poet Percy Shelley reintroduced the classical figure Proserpine, daughter of Ceres, and hailed Ceres herself as Mother Earth. In Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, the protagonist is visited by the moon in the form of a divine female whom she calls Mother and receives guidance from.
Robert Browning created a divine female embodiment of the natural world, choosing Artemis as his foundation and elevating her to a figure with dominion over the earth, sky, and underworld. Algernon Swinburne created an earth goddess named Hertha, while numerous other authors revived or reinvented feminine embodiments of nature. One of the most striking examples of this imagery being put into public practice occurred during the Festival of Unity and Indivisibility in Paris. To celebrate the first anniversary of the monarchy's collapse, a state-sponsored festival was held on August 10, 1793. One part of the celebration centered on a statue of nature standing between two lions. Water flowed from her breasts, from which participants drank. Women dressed in white sang hymns, and the president of the National Convention invoked nature for fertility and abundance. Though not a revival of pagan religion, the ceremony demonstrates how readily revolutionary France turned to feminine imagery when attempting to embody the life-giving power of the natural world. As the Romantic era progressed, this longing for a lost relationship with nature collided with new archaeological discoveries and emerging theories about humanity's ancient past. What followed was one of the most influential chapters in the history of Mother Earth. The belief that behind the many earth goddesses of history lay a single great goddess worshipped at the dawn of civilization. It was a theory built on genuine discoveries, bold imagination, and, as later scholars would argue, a great deal of wishful thinking. But that is a chapter for the next video. For now, let's assess what we've learned and what we can take away from it. We'll be saving the more detailed analysis for part 2 of this video, but for now, let's review. Mother Earth is a figure either personifying or representing the earth and nature. She is often associated with fertility, agriculture, the natural world, the seasons, and the cycle of life and death. In many examples, she is also the mother of humanity and the source of all life. She's likely one of the earliest types of deities found in human religion, and versions of her exist throughout the European world and beyond. In the Greco-Roman world alone, we have many variations of her, such as the primordial Gaia, the personable agricultural Demeter, and the wild, uncontrollable Sibylla. Examples such as Nerthus and Ximena show that similar beliefs and rites concerning Mother Earth goddesses permeated the ancient world. As Christianity arose, Mother Earth became more allegorical and symbolic, though she was also sometimes seen as a figure within Christian cosmology, subservient to God. More often, though, she became Natura, an allegorical figure for the earth commonly seen in literature and art. In tandem, the Virgin Mary filled many of the roles Mother Earth embodied, such as symbolizing fertility and agriculture. Just as Mary was the garden Christ sprouted from, so she is the earth from which humanity emerged from. In the Renaissance, a revival of ancient philosophies and mysticism led to nature becoming more enchanted, Mother Earth art becoming more popular, and the idea of nature becoming an interconnected, sacred entity becoming more widespread. This process accelerated with the advent of industry, as humanity became increasingly distant from nature and longed to return to their primal roots, creating the Romantic movement. Nature was romanticized and personified in poetry and literature, creating fertile ground for a plethora of Mother Earth figures to be revived and created by writers. We end our journey today in the 19th century, during a time of rapid scientific advancement, still firmly rooted in the Romantic movement. As we see, Mother Earth is a recurring figure and pattern that serves many purposes. Humans seemingly need Earth to be more than the ground they tread on and the fields they till. They feel connected to it in a primal way, the place we emerge from, the place that nourishes us, and the place we return to when we die. We depend on it, and we belong to it, much like we do our parents, or more specifically, our mother. Mother Earth seems to provide the symbolic language we need to properly express our ties to the Earth. So much so, that in the next video, we'll see what happens as scientists and scholars frantically jump on the idea that the Earth Mother is our original goddess, and the backbone of ancient humanity. I want to thank you all for watching and following along this dense journey with me so far. We've taken our first step into a larger world,
And I'm honestly not sure about every road we'll take and what every destination even is. The divine feminine is a broad and complex topic, and I merely aim to do my small part in painting a tiny portion of this grand canvas. Or rather, guide us along and show you all what part of this painting I've discovered myself. This won't be the only series I do on this channel, nor will it be the only kind of video I do for a while. I'll be doing smaller, unrelated videos between these big, dense ones to prevent burnout. Expect media analysis, unrelated deep dives, rankings, perhaps some cool short-form content where I can flex my editing muscles in smaller chunks. I'm new to the whole YouTube thing. As you can probably tell, I'm still working on my setup, my sound quality, my editing, all of this. I just got out of college, and this is just a way for me to have a creative output, both academically and technically. And this is a project that kind of came naturally to me as I kept running into these symbols and motifs during my studies. So I figured it would be a fitting first topic. So forgive some of the hiccups you might have noticed. I understand sound quality is probably not going to be the best, so I'm going to apologize for that in advance. This microphone is borrowed from somebody else. The microphone that I have is much better quality, but the shock mount I had for it broke, and I was ready to go ahead and get started recording, so I was working with what I have. I'm very excited to start my journey here, and I thank you all for taking a chance with me. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Feel free to comment any questions, comments, or concerns you may have. My sources for both my information as well as my images and videos will be linked below. And thank you all, and I'll see you next time.